Good morning. How are we got any issues we need to address this morning before we get started?
I think there's only one, Your Honor, before Dr. Cohen. There are some other issues that can be taken up as to become timely and witnesses appear, so we don't waste time this morning.
Okay. What do we got? What's going on?
Dr. Cohen is, I believe, will be their first witness. You recall that previously she testified at a prior hearing. The court recalls I did file not only a motion to eliminate regarding her testimony, but also subsequent to that previous hearing, a Daubert motion. At the time that Judge Lewis was hearing the Daubert motions, Mr. Michaels and I had a discussion regarding Dr. Cohen. We felt that we could work it out without taking up the time. Court's time. I believe we have reached an understanding. We just need to memorialize it on the record, and then Dr. Cohen can testify pursuant to that understanding, which alleviated hours worth of motion time, so we were able to work that one out.
I appreciate that.
I did send Mr. Michaels a copy of her previous testimony. Mr. Michaels. That's fine. Yeah. Maybe we just approach.
Uh-huh.
Submitted that to Mr. Michaels last night. I believe to the most part, we are in agreement, along with just a couple of matters that I need to put on the record.
Okay. All right, I reviewed that.
So that's what'll not happen. And we've agreed that there'll be no testimony regarding the interview of Mr. Reeves and personal opinions regarding whether or not he was scared, whether or not she felt the case was justifiable, regarding the defendant's perception that he was a model police officer, that he did not choose to escalate the situation, her opinion he's not capable of violence, his perception no longer able to do the job, her opinion no mental problems, her opinion not believe that the defendant is capable of taking on a younger man, her opinion about his perceptions of vulnerability and why he did certain things. That she believes, her opinion, he did everything he could. Her opinion, he's old and disabled, and that's why he responded the way he did. Her opinion, no other choice. Her opinion, the aging process affects. Let me ask this last one. I just wanted to clarify the last one.
Okay.
That she's not going to opine that the aging process affected specifically Mr. Reeves' perception.
Okay.
So that's the, and Mr. Michaels can confirm that's the agreement.
Your Honor, that's the agreement. I mean, 90.702 tells us there are two types of expert opinion. One is to give an opinion of what the expert believes happened or should have happened. In this case, it's in the form of a dissertation. So essentially, we agree that Dr. Cohen's here to educate the jury regarding the aging, the process of aging, and how aging, the process manifests itself on certain decision-making, vulnerability, perception of vulnerability, those sort of things. Nothing to do directly with Mr. Reeves. She's not saying, you know, I analyzed him and this is my opinion, so we agree with that.
Okay, very
And
good.
the state, I've taken her deposition.
Okay.
And she is qualified to do that. There's
Okay.
just one other matter we can approach.
Sure. All right, while that's being done, I'll announce all the presents. We've got Mr. Scott Rosenwasser for the state, Mr. Manny Garcia, Mr. Glenn Martin for state, Mr. Richard Escobar, Mr. Dino Michaels for defense, and Mr. Reeves is present, as is Karina Flores. Mr.
Thunderberg is in the back
Okay.
with the big screen.
Okay, very good. All right, can we go ahead and proceed then?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, bring them in.
Jurors enter in the courtroom, Your Honor.
All righty.
Jurors may be seated. Jurors are present in the courtroom, Your Honor.
Thank you, Deputy. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for returning. Were you all able to abide by my instructions during the recess? Excellent, thank you. All right, Mr. Michaels?
Good morning, Your Honor. The defense will call Dr. Donna Cohen.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you shall give in this call to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do. Go ahead, Mr. Michaels.
Please state your name.
Donna Cohen.
What is your profession?
I'm a professor emeritus in the Department of Community and Health Sciences at the University of South Florida.
And how long have you been at the University of South Florida?
I've been at the university since 1992.
And the department that you're a professor emeritus, first tell me what a professor emeritus means.
A professor emeritus is status given to certain faculty members upon their retirement. You have to be evaluated by your dean. It has to go to the provost and to the president. Not everybody becomes an emeritus. It's based upon your contributions over your professional career.
And how long did you serve as a professor at the University of South Florida?
Since 1992.
Now tell me what the department, tell me the name of the department again, please.
The department was Child and Family Studies.
And what does that have to do with aging?
Aging is a lifespan phenomenon, and the department that I was recruited to chair in 1992 was split into two pieces, and faculty moved into larger departments. It was an economic move.
Okay. And so was one of those pieces the study of aging? And aging
Absolutely.
related?
We had a substantial contingent of faculty members.
And is that the department that you started at University of South Florida?
The one I was recruited to was the Department of Aging and Mental Health in 1992.
All right. Now let's talk a little bit about your education. Undergrad?
Undergrad was at Duke University.
And what was your degree from Duke?
It was in zoology.
And what year did you graduate?
I believe it was 1969.
Your master's?
Was at the University of South Florida, in the University of Southern California in
Okay, that was in 1973.
yes.
And what was your master's in?
My master's was a study of chromosomal changes. The chromosomes carry the genetic material, and was looking at the relationship of chromosome changes to people and their cognitive functioning as they got older.
Okay, and was that considered a specialization in adult development and aging?
Yes,
And what about your doctorate? Where did you get that from?
from the same institution.
Okay, and what was your doctorate in?
My doctorate was an evaluation of spatial abilities and verbal abilities in older adults past age 60. Until I did my study, nobody had looked at sex differences in spatial and verbal skills in people over the age of 60.
And again, did that specialization have to do with adult development and aging as well?
Yes,
Okay, now I imagine you had many positions between the years of 1975 and present. Is that fair to say?
yes, sir.
Let's go over just some of them.
Sorry. There's banging going on over there that seems like we might be able to alleviate. I'm sorry, Dr. Cohen.
Director, well, let's start with this. 1976 and 1979, Assistant Professor, Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, School of Medicine, University of Washington. Tell me a little bit about that position.
I was recruited there as an assistant professor and was promoted to associate professor with tenure after 4 years. And I had the responsibilities of continuing my research. I also was teaching medical students, residents in psychiatry. I started the first training program for psychiatric fellows and psychology fellows in the country, and ran it with a gentleman who ran the residency program.
And again, having to do with the study of aging.
Yes, sir.
Now we're going to go forward. I know there were a lot of appointments in between. Let's go to 1981 to 1985. Division Head, Unified Division of Aging and Geriatric Psychiatry, Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York. Tell me about that position.
That was a position within the College of Medicine, the Albert Einstein College of Medicine and Montefiore Medical Center. As a PhD, not a MD psychiatrist, I was made division head because at that time there were really enough people to take that position. However, the two psychiatrists functioned as my co-division heads because of the obvious legal and clinical implications. There I started the first chief residency in geriatric psychiatry and got a number of grants from the National Institutes of Mental Health to improve medical school education. I also continued my research.
Okay, and if you would just lean a little back off the microphone, we're getting,
Sorry.
that's okay, we can hear you fine from that level. What about at the same time, postgraduate fellowship training program, the same institution?
That again was a program to recruit individuals who had wanted advanced training in geriatric psychiatry, and again, it was one of the first that was established in the country, and I probably had 20 fellows go through that who are now major leaders in the field today.
Okay, 1986 and 92, University of Illinois at Chicago, Deputy Director, Gerontology Center. Tell us a little bit about that.
I was also a professor in the School of Public Health, and I was assisting the dean, who was the director of the center, in basically the entire range of activities, from managing faculty in their research programs, training young faculty how to get grants. I was doing a significant amount of teaching across the university, and I worked with the president of the university at that time to get a major grant to plan what was then to be the 1991 White House Conference on Aging, which was changed for political reasons.
1992, Chair, Department of Aging and Mental Health, Florida Mental Health Institute at University of South Florida. Tell me about that.
There, I was chairman of a department of about 30 people. At becoming a chair means you're beginning to develop your departmental faculty, your student programming, and to minimize the amount of time you spent in research because you have to develop a class department. We did that, but I also had a group of faculty members who worked with me in my lab, so I was able to continue my research.
1993, Director of Aging Studies Initiative, University of South Florida. What's that about?
I was hired as a chair, but the provost and the president of the university wanted my dean to allow me to develop an aging initiative, which led to the first PhD program in aging studies in the country, and it also led to a major set of projects involving, I would say, 80% of the departments in the university.
Okay, and I know that's just some of your appointments. Let's talk about what are called editorial appointments. What's an editorial appointment?
An editorial appointment means you can either be appointed as an editor, where you have full responsibility for the overall quality of the journal. You can also be an associate editor, where your job is to review articles and also assist the editor in making decisions about the conclusions that other people meet. It's something that almost every faculty member does. I was editor of one particular journal for about 8 years, and then passed it off to someone else because I had other things to do.
Now let's talk about, what do you mean when you say journal? What does that mean?
There's many different journals that faculty members publish in, students publish in the field of psychology in general, in the field of traumatology, in the field of geriatrics, gerontology. There are journals that are regarded as Class 1 journals, which are the most difficult to get into with a high rejection rate. There are the middle and lower class journals, but we have to be careful about lower class journals because the field of aging has exploded and there are new areas opening up, and new journals start, and quite often students start publishing there.
So journals are like written articles that that teachers and educators would look at to learn about the field?
Teachers, educators, other faculty members trying to enhance their own research, other mental health professionals, a full range of gerontology, or the field of aging, is a highly interdisciplinary field, so there are many individuals who may have interest in those.
Okay, so from 1970, and you have several, let's go over a couple of them. 1997 and 1990 Editorial Board Experimental Aging Research. You did that for, it looks like 13 years.
Yes,
And is that a journal?
that's a journal, and it was a quality journal, and it was highly experimental. So
And is-
you didn't get clinical studies or qualitative studies. It was pretty heavy science.
And editorial board meaning what? You were invited to be on the editorial board?
You're invited, you're vetted, and approved, as long as you continue to do your work.
Okay. There's one for book review editor, behavior, health, and aging. What is that?
As editor of that particular journal, I did many of the book reviews because my associate editor was handling many of the administrative capacities, and it was a way to keep up with the field.
Okay. Between 1995 and 2004, you're on the editorial board of Journal of Aging and Identity, right?
Yes,
And also the Journal of Mental Health and Aging.
yes.
Let's talk about some of the professional and scientific societies you're a member of. You're a member of, or were a member of, American Psychological Association.
Yes.
Tell me, what is that?
American Psychological Association is the premier association for the field of psychology, ranging from forensic psychology to aging and human development to clinical. There may be 40 different divisions to that, and I stayed and was very active with that organization until I retired. So,
And what about the American College of Forensic Examiners Institute, American Board of Psychological Specialties, diplomat in medical psychology?
I was a member there where I was participating in writing articles, doing education and training throughout the state of Florida, as well as other states, to write about my work in some forensic issues. And I also was working with a number of faculty members who were members of that organization, and we actually set up a coalition of researchers.
Now, you also received several awards throughout your career, right?
Yes.
Let's just go over some. 1997, Who's Who in Medicine and Healthcare. What is that one about?
Objection, relevance.
Overruled.
Who's Who in Medicine and Healthcare?
It's a listing to which people who meet certain standards or have certain credentials are listed as being nationally recognized experts in the broad field of medicine.
Okay. You also won in 1995 the Annual Authors Award at University of South Florida.
Yes.
And in 88, even back then, the Chicago Healthcare Council Award for Healthcare Management.
Yes.
Let's talk about, and there are other ones, but let's go to some of the what are called national, international responsibilities. Tell me what that means.
The academic, scientific, and clinical communities have a number of venues. Since my first appointment, I have sat on the Board of Counselors for the National Institute on Aging 2 years into becoming a faculty member, where we're reviewing the responsibilities and the accomplishments of the National Institutes on Aging. I sat on numerous study sections, which are again nationally based scientific programs where scientists are brought together to evaluate grants. And I have chaired many of these throughout my entire career. So basically, from the first time I became a faculty member until my retirement, I served on multiple committees.
Okay, well, let's just talk about a couple of them. Member NIH study section, social psychology, personality, and interpersonal processes. What's NIH?
The National Institutes of Health.
Okay. And tell me about that organization.
The National Institutes of Health is a major government agency that has many different institutes associated with it, ranging from the NIA, the National Institute on Aging, to the National Cancer Institute, to the National Infectious Disease Institute, so there are probably 20, 25 different groups. And the responsibilities of these groups is, again, to promote research excellence in the fields to which you're appointed.
And 2015 White House Conference on Aging, regional/national meeting, what is that?
There have been White House conferences on aging since 1961, about 10 years apart. There are many responsibilities. The people elected and appointed to these committees represent some of the top leaders in the field of aging, and the intent is not only to promote research, but to promote programs that will educate professionals as well as the public, and also to enhance the political and policy programs to support our growing aging population.
In 2006, you're a member of the National Institute of Health Study Section for Psychosocial Development, Risk, and Prevention. Is that dealing with aging?
Yes.
Board member, National Committee for the Prevention of Elder Abuse in Washington, D.C. Again, we're dealing with aging in that?
Yes.
Consultant, Office of the Inspector General, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C. Tell me a little bit about that.
I was working with them as a consultant, approved by the university to investigate Medicare fraud and abuse.
Okay. Again, let's talk about, you're a member of the advisory board, the Encyclopedia of Care of the Elderly, Springer Publishing Company. Is that what it sounds like? You're part of an advisory board looking at this
Correct.
encyclopedia that's being written?
Not just looking at it, but actively writing it, recruiting other individuals, and to maintaining the overall accuracy of the field at that stage.
I'm just looking through them, there are pages of them. A consultant, Department of Justice, 96 and 98 in Washington, D.C. Is that dealing with aging as well?
Yes, it was. Janet Reno had convened a group of experts to come in and look at issues affecting the abuse from injury to death in older people.
Member of Advisory Board, Center for Aging and Development, Medical College of Wisconsin. That obviously deals with aging.
Yes, it does.
Contractor to plan the 1995 White House Conference on Aging. Tell me what that means.
At that point, the Federal Council on Aging, which advises the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who in turn advised the President, or the Secretary and the President, wanted to have a national planning committee, but they only had a limited amount of money to spend. At that point, the President of the University of Illinois asked me if I would take on the responsibility of helping him convince other people to donate to the cause. So the University of Illinois put in a $1 amount of money to get the contract from the Federal Council on Aging, and with his help and the help of many people in the field, actually raised several $1 million to support the planning of the conference.
1981, you were an invited participant to the mini White House Conference on Aging. Tell me about that.
The structure of the White House Conference has changed over the years, and there was an attempt to broaden the involvement of the business community, to go beyond just the scientific community and politicians. And so there were, I would say, 20-some-odd many White House conferences on aging. I participated in the one on Alzheimer's disease. I participated in the one on business involvement. And again, it brought together groups of people who were identified as experts to help identify an agenda to improve the well-being of older people in our society.
Member of the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Animal Models for Research on Aging, Institute of Laboratory Animal Resources, National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C. Tell me about that particular involvement.
Being appointed to a National Academy of Science Committee is a prestigious appointment. That was a particularly interesting part of my career because at that time, the University of Washington maintained the largest and only primate community, macaque monkeys, in the country. And they were growing older, and the university had decided that they could no longer support older macaques because they were too expensive. Doug Bowden, who headed the Primate Center, brought in a group of us to help design a study, and we designed a study to compare 40-year-old macaques to 20-year-olds to 10-year-olds. Unfortunately, to do the biopsychosocial comparisons, we had to sacrifice some of the animals. They could not find a psychologist who would be willing to do the behavioral studies. So Dr. Bowden convinced my chairman that that was something I could do.
Now, go all the way back to '71. You were part of the staff for the White House Conference on Aging even back then.
Right.
Now, you also have several local responsibilities, and they're listed in your CV or your resume, and that will be putting into evidence. But let's just talk about a couple of them. You were a member of the Executive Committee for Elder Court in Hillsborough County.
Yes.
Advisory board member, University Community Hospital Senior Care.
Yes.
Now, books, there's a list of at least 11 books that you either authored or co-authored. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and they're all on the subject of aging
Yes.
and aging research.
Correct. And clinical work and education.
There are also journal articles and book chapters, and those number almost 200, 196 by count of your resume. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And again, all dealing with the field of aging
Yes, sir.
in terms of education
Yes, sir.
and research.
Yes, sir.
Okay. There are also some papers or articles that have been submitted that are waiting to be published. Is that right?
Correct.
You also have some technical reports in print.
Correct.
Part of your teaching experience, you've taught undergrad courses in biology of aging,
Correct.
the psychology of aging,
Yes.
honors courses in challenging in an aging society,
Yes.
applied ethics of aging,
Yes.
graduate courses in the psychopathology of aging,
Yes.
aging and mental health,
Yes.
the psychobiology of aging,
Yes.
and the biopsychosocial aspects of aging, right?
Correct.
Okay. You've also taught medical students,
Correct.
dental students,
Yes.
pharmacy students,
Yes.
law students.
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Amen.
Dr. Cohen, let me show you what's been marked as defense at this point, Exhibit G. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and is that your curriculum vitae?
Yes, sir.
Or I was referred to as resume. Is it the same thing?
It's a vita and a biography.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time, defense would move, I'm sorry, did you see this, Martin?
May we approach?
Yes. at this time, defense would tender Dr. Cohen as a qualified expert pursuant to 90.702 in the field of aging and aging studies.
Court finds she can testify as to those subjects.
Okay, let's talk about this, the field of aging. Sounds very broad. Tell me a little bit about the field of aging and what that entails.
Aging is a natural process. It's also called senescence. It's a process of change in the biology, the psychology, the physiology, and behavior and social and environmental circumstances of older people. There are two reasons people age broadly. One is there are genetic causes, and second, there's something called wear and tear of the overall body, mind, as a result of time and exposure to a variety of circumstances. Aging, senescence, actually begins about 25, 30. You're not aware of those changes, but they are progressive. They progress at different rates in different people.
Let me talk about this a little bit. Would you agree or disagree with me that aging is universal?
Correct.
In terms of over the human
Absolutely.
population, right?
Correct.
And you talked about bio, psycho, social. Do I have that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The bio part is what? The biology?
Biology.
Tell me a little bit about that. What do you mean by biology?
Biology refers to changes in cells and tissues that lead to changes in functioning. So examples of that might be changes in the cells of muscles and cartilage around joints, so that the changes that occur, which may be a hardening of the cartilage, which can be aging but also due to injury and overuse, leads to some functional impairments in your ability to get around. There are aging changes in the eye that lead to a yellowing of the lens, which affects your ability to see near objects. The lens becomes stiff. The eye loses nerve cells, which leads to changes in depth perception. And in fact, it's probably the changes in the eye that awaken most people to be aware that something is changing in their body, because many of the biologic changes that are going on in your metabolic rate, in your breathing capacities, are not on your radar.
Let's talk about a couple of those things, just so I can understand. One is, you talked about decrease in muscles. Tell me about that. What does the aging process do to muscle mass? How is muscle mass affected by the process of aging?
Okay, I'll add caveat, it's affected by the process of aging, but it can also be changed by the physical activity that an individual has to maintain the muscle mass. But as a function of primary aging, which is changes that are not due to disease, you see that there are changes in, there's certain muscles that contribute to contraction, there's certain muscles that relax, and this affects this slows down with time, but it happens gradually and cumulatively. There are changes in the nerve conduction velocity, so that if you asked me to hold my head back from the microphone as you did, I did it pretty quickly. If you had me just press something to show I had a good reaction time, it would be slowed. Reaction times are slowed due to changes in conduction along your nerves. And what happens to your nerves and muscles, because they're interconnected, is that it leads to problems in mobility and functioning at certain times. But again, it's not at the same rate and pace in all people.
Okay, now you said it's gradual. So does that mean that somebody would wake up one day and say, I'm old? Or is it cumulative, as you said? Tell me what you mean by cumulative. Is that the same as gradual?
Yes, but it also refers to a dynamic quality, that these changes are occurring, they're not on our radar screen, so that the difference in a 30-year-old and a 70-year-old would be about a brain weight in a 70-year-old, which is about 82% of what it was when they were 30. There'll be a change in their basal metabolic rate, how they metabolize and heat their bodies. And that goes down in a 70-year-old to 84% of their 30-year-old capacity. Your breathing tidal capacity in a 70-year-old is 45% of what it was as a 30-year-old. So these things are happening, but they don't necessarily impact your ability to drive a car to work, to do your job, to take care of your family. But at some point, these do become debilitating, and you also have changes physiologically that lead to an increased risk for disease and serious diseases. In fact, 74% of the Medicare population living in the community have 2 to 5 chronic conditions.
Now, let me ask you, you said the word disability, and you said the word functional impairment. What does functional impairment mean?
Functional impairment means you have trouble doing something, so that I fell on Bayshore Drive in Tampa and broke my wrist, and so I had problems. I was impaired in my ability to write with my right hand, but I could compensate by doing it with my left hand. It also affected my ability to do other things. So that functional impairment implies a loss of capacity that may be compensated by.
Okay, so loss of functional impairment, would that be, I can't walk from this lectern to the witness box as quickly as I used to 20 years ago? Would that be considered a functional impairment?
Yes.
And if that's a result of my arthritic knees, would that be, unless there's an injury, as part of the natural aging process?
It'd probably be a mixture of primary aging, but also we talked about aging being subject to wear and tear. So, repeated use of joints, repeated injuries, depending upon your occupation, could lead to significant impairment in your ability to do a variety of things that affect your mobility and your ability to function.
And let me ask you this, I probably should have asked you earlier. One thinks of aging and one thinks, well, I know that people get older. Tell me why you got involved in this field as an educator.
I was a undergraduate at Duke University from 1965 to 69. Duke was one of the few universities in the country that had a large aging center. And at that time, the aging center had 65% of the NIH budget for aging research. There were about 40 different faculty members involved in research and clinical work, and I was just attracted to the field. I also needed a job as an undergraduate, and even though I had a fellowship from the government, and got myself a job actually doing coding in the aging center. And as I got exposed to the graduate students and the faculty members, it became a passion for me.
Okay. And why is there a need to educate not only your students, but the public about aging and aging issues?
Objection, relevance to this case.
Approach.
based on your research and your teachings, is the United States an ageist society?
Yes,
And tell me what you mean by that.
and we're not the only ageist society. The ageism reflects the negative attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors towards older people, and older people often taken to be 60, 65, and older.
Objection, relevance.
All right, approach.
Okay, we talked a little bit about the bio and biopsychosocial. Let's talk about the psycho. What are we talking about in that segment of that word in terms of aging?
We're talking about changes that may occur in your ability to learn things quickly, changes in short-term memory, long-term memory, your ability to problem solve, your ability to control your emotions, your ability to behave appropriately in different circumstances, either social circumstances or more demanding circumstances. It also refers to your personality, which remains largely stable throughout your lifespan unless you have a significant pathologic problem. There are changes in the brain and the nervous system which affect your psychological functioning, but also issues in biopsychosocial is a term to look at the overall body and mind, but biopsychosocial makes us think that there are discrete functions of all three. Actually, the bio, psycho, and social interact with each other to contribute to positive and negative outcomes, to contribute to the type of diseases people get in their different organ systems, so that it really does integrate, because aging is dynamic. So the biologic changes that you may have in your brain that leads to certain kinds of vulnerabilities in blood vessels, in nerve conduction, brain cell loss, actually does affect your behavior. So they're really interactive, if that's responsive.
Let's talk about the term you use, vulnerabilities. The topic, vulnerability of the aged. Tell me what that means to you as a topic.
Vulnerability actually comes from the Latin word which means to wound. It is something that indicates one is in a position to be physically or emotionally hurt, attacked. The concept of vulnerability in older people rises directly out of the kinds of diseases, the kinds of injuries, the wear and tear, and the illnesses that people get. So the older people who are at risk for more medical and physical issues become vulnerable, meaning they're at risk to not be able to do things and not be able to protect themselves. In fact, the things that the older population are most afraid of are frailty, losing their health, being hurt, and having an untimely death.
Now, as one ages, is there a realization is there a heightened awareness of one's vulnerability? In other words, do we become, as we age, more aware that we're more vulnerable now than we were when we were younger?
It comes, but it's something that doesn't become part of your awareness on your radar screen until you're hitting late midlife and early old age. Bernice Newgarten described the categories of aging, which is the young old are 65 to 74, the old 75 to 84, and the oldest old 85 and older. So that sometime, again, depending upon your injuries, your illnesses, changes in your biology, which lead to immune dysfunction and to cancers, do affect your vulnerability and your ability to tolerate stress and your ability to respond to protect yourself.
So let's talk a little bit about this idea of an awareness of the vulnerability. How does that dovetail in with how an older person would react to stress? Is there a difference between the aged realizing this vulnerability, reacting to stress? Do they have a heightened awareness or response to stress?
Yes, you can be a young person who's been severely injured and know that you can't do certain things and would be vulnerable. In fact, we all could be vulnerable to suffering. But what makes the older person population different is that having an awareness of not being able to do things as well, in fact, to be compromised. You may want, to have clean the gutters, but you're not going to go up on a ladder to clean the gutters. You're not going to do certain things knowing that it's not something that's safe to do. And older people who are without serious cognitive disorders do have an awareness of what they can do, what they can't do, and in fact change their behaviors to try and overcome the impairment.
Now, if an older individual, I guess a younger individual as well, but an older individual that has the cumulative effects of aging, that has the awareness of his or her vulnerability, if they are presented with a situation that presents a certain risk, would it be fair to call the individual making those decisions being involved in a risk assessment?
John, around the road, Jeff.
Okay.
Now let's talk about vulnerability, this idea of heightened awareness among the aged. At times, would you agree that as an aged person approaches certain situations, they have to make certain decisions based on their limitations, right?
Correct.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. If an aged person is faced with an obstacle, let's say, okay, whether it's getting in a car, from a wheelchair, that sort of thing, tell me about kind of the thought process. How does that work? How does an individual make a decision based on a situation that potentially could be injurious, like getting from a wheelchair into an Uber, for instance? Tell me how that works. So first of all, you're looking at the situation. Is that right? Walk me through that, please.
Your Honor, again, I'm going to object. It's the same objection previously, yes, Judge.
Approach.
as we age, does it affect the way we see the world?
Absolutely.
How are some of the ways it affects the way we look at the world?
Aging, again, can be accompanied by diseases, so it affects the way we see ourselves and estimate or know our abilities to do certain things. It affects our ways of looking at other people in terms of being afraid, being happy, the full range of social interactions. It affects our being in social situations. It affects the way we look for housing. It affects the way we act if we lose a spouse, or we lose a child, or we lose someone that we love. The older person also has a lot of experiences based upon personal issues as well as occupational issues, and this history affects the way they think about themselves.
Okay, and so it affects places where they would go?
Correct.
Maybe places they would feel comfortable? Do you agree or
Correct.
disagree? Okay. Maybe you said even affect where they live?
Yes, in fact, there's a very large literature on vulnerability and the age of addressing these issues.
Okay, without talking about the literature, let's talk about your own research and your experience in a half century in the field of aging. Tell me about that.
Can you rephrase that or
Yes,
repeat it, please?
Does the process of aging, does the aged make choices of where they live based on their perceptions of self and vulnerability of that?
And
Your Honor, I cannot go exact with the same argument. 402, 403.
Let me approach, Your Honor.
Yes.
So as you get older, as we get older, and you realize what your limitations have become, does it affect the choices you make in life?
absolutely. And there's a large literature on
Okay,
vulnerability.
without talking about other people's literature, tell me about your own opinion and your own research and studies.
The choices that are made have to do with every single life circumstance you can imagine. It has to do with, will I continue living in the same house? Am I going to move to a safer environment? What can I do to take care of a spouse or another family member? What can I do if I'm having financial concerns? The whole range of decisions that people are making are based upon this. And this has come from my research with families and interviewing older people in clinical circumstances, and in some of the research where we're finding that it's.
Excuse me, I object.
Your Honor, she said we're finding.
No.
Yeah, sustained.
Okay. So your answer then in terms of choices?
It influences almost every choice you make because of the challenges that you're facing based upon your potentially functional limitations, your past history, any injuries and illnesses, because what aging does is put you in every organ system at risk for disease, frailty, and even if you don't get really sick, frailty affects older people for their last 11.4 years of their lives, which affects the decisions you make about how you live your life, what you do, and what you can't do.
Okay. May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
No further questions. Thank you.
Cross? Yeah. You may.
Dr. Cohen, you would agree with me that everyone ages differently as far as the progression.
I would say the population changes differently.
The population changes.
Right.
So the population would be the people in the population,
Correct.
which are individuals.
Right.
So everybody individually changes differently, correct?
Not everybody, not point person, but if you look at our aged population, the heterogeneity in the rates of aging,
what?
heterogeneity, the aged are less alike than any other age group because there are now about 15 million people over the age.
Dr. Cohen, I appreciate it, but you're not responsive
Judge,
to
I'm
my,
gonna object. She's
not
trying to
responsive
answer
to
the
my
question.
question.
Stop, one at a time, please.
Judge, I'm going to object. She's trying to answer the question. She needs to be allowed to answer the question, please.
She's not responsive to my question, and I have a right to stop her when she's not responsive and get her back on track.
All right. What was the question again?
My question was that every individual ages differently. That calls for either a yes or a no. She wants to explain it later, but she totally went off
Okay,
track.
all
My
right.
question to you, Dr. Cohen, is that you would agree with me that every individual will age differently.
No, not every individual.
Two individuals can age at the same pace.
Could, yes.
Okay. That leaves some other people that are aging at a different pace, correct?
Could, yes.
So when you had your discussion with Mr. Michaels before this jury, you gave us generally an education of the aging process, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you charge $200 an hour, right, for your time?
No.
How much do you charge for your time?
$425.
$425 for your time, and so far you've been paid over $2,000 in this case?
I think so.
One moment, Your Honor.
You may.
No further questions.
Redirect?
Prosecutor asked you if everyone ages differently. What about this? Does everyone age?
Yes.
No further questions.
Thank you. May this witness be released?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. You're free to go.
Thank you.
Yes? Who's our next witness?
It's going to be Mrs. Reeves, Your Honor.
Maybe we better take a break. Take a short recess before we start that
It'd be fine
witness.
with the
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's take 10 minutes. Remember my instructions during the recess, and we'll see you back shortly.
All rise, court is in recess.